Thank you very much. We're going to talk about scaling this morning. This has become a big issue in Scrum. I've been spending more time in Silicon Valley, and I spent a week there recently visiting 12 companies. And the fewest number of teams in one of the companies was 200. So there are literally thousands and thousands of Scrum teams. I was amazed that it took so many people to get so little done. And I asked them, how many of you have working software at the end of your sprints? And only 20% of the people raised their hand. So that gave me some insight into there's a real problem out there in Agile land. Maybe that's why Dave Thomas has the title of his talk. In any event, we need to talk about what we do with these huge Scrum implementations. My company does a lot of training and consulting all over the world. It's been a real privilege to work with Jörn for so many years. We also do publications. My son will be talking this afternoon. He's a journalist. We've done 3 books in the last couple of years. Building out a product called Scrum Lab on our website with all the information on Scrum for the last 23 years. And we also have a hardware practice. Scrum is moving out into hardware. Some of the companies I'll talk about will be hardware companies. If you look at what's going on in companies around the world, we're working with organizations like a defense contractor who doesn't want to be named. They had a problem because Lockheed made a bid, a $400 million bid for a radar system using Scrum, and they came in at half price and took it away from this vendor. And they came to me and they said, Jeff, the government has told us that we will never get another contract if we don't do Scrum, if we don't deliver at half price. So we have to do Scrum. And we not only have to do Scrum, but it has to be good Scrum that delivers at half price, because if we bid $500 million and it costs us $1 billion, we're going to be out of business. So these guys have to have working software. So their approach to scaling is quite different than, I've spent every year I wind up at Spotify for a while looking at what they're doing, a natively Agile company. Their model for scaling is very clean and very elegant. They're focused on innovation, very different from the defense contractor. A more typical organization, one of the leading software companies in the world, Autodesk, their problem is even different. They're worried about startups. Every time a startup gets big enough to capture any significant market share, they buy them. What they're afraid of is the startup they can't buy, the Google of AutoCAD. And they said, we've been doing Scrum for 6 years recently, but it's not good enough. The startups we're buying are doing Scrum better than us. So they brought us in there. We retrained all the teams, all the management, all the product owners to raise their whole Scrum implementation to the next level. Now, one of the things that a lot of companies, particularly in Silicon Valley, are interested in is in innovation. But at the same time, a lot of companies are interested in predictability. But if you have total predictability, you have zero innovation. So balancing out these things as you approach what you're going to do to scale your Scrum is a difficult task. One of the ways to think about where companies are is to look at this graph. Some companies are, very strong process, follow the rules. Other companies are constantly improving their process, iterating. Some companies are focused on innovation, and other companies want a very specific convergent design. And if you place companies on this map, Apple is more innovative right now than Microsoft, and that's a big problem. They need to move in this dimension. The defense contractor is down here. This is an area where, they like safe. They want to be safer, and they want to be more predictable, and they want to be more specific, and they want a more convergent product design. And they have to deliver a $500 million plan step by step, and they have to deliver it in a specific time frame. But Autodesk, as I mentioned, they're over here more flexible, but they want to move up the innovation curve. In fact, they want to be like Spotify, which is way up here in the right corner. So different companies are in different places, and that will cause them to approach how they scale their organizations. And what you see as when they start in very different ways. So the defense contractor, their first problem was, after they got over having to do Scrum or go out of business, the next problem was, how do they report to the government on their project? How do they use points to report earned value to the government and negotiate a $500 million contract and get the government to agree? So they had to figure that all out. But if you look at Autodesk, they're like, okay, our Scrum teams need to ramp up. We need to raise the whole bar on the way we're doing Scrum. And doing that, they need to start floating the impediments they have all the way up to the executive team. The management themselves need to be completely retrained to make sure they're operating properly. Spotify is focused on teams and how do they get the teams to achieve a vision. And the way it works is the CEO and his team has some initiatives, some high-level objectives. They make them really visible, and the teams self-organize around them. Nobody tells them what to do. Very different kind of company. Not very safe, okay? They would never use safe. And if you look at the way they go after, how do they prioritize, how do they manage portfolios, how do they break backlog down, how do they get it into release plans, how do they get it to the teams? This is a big issue in defense and Autodesk, but Spotify is really more interested in releasing. How do they release to the customer? And so in the last year, their major focus was Spotify was already really fast. Every team delivers every sprint live, without exception. But the CEO says, that's not fast enough. Google, Amazon, Apple, they're going to kill us. We have to go twice as fast. So we got together with the coaches and brainstormed, what will we tell them? They're already fast. You can't tell them to double up. We decided to say, you need to go to continuous deployment. If you do that, your quality of your process, automated testing, is going to have to be so much better, you will automatically go twice as fast. So we got about a third of the teams doing automated continuous deployment now, and the operations team had to get out of the way. They're not allowed to deploy. What they do is they have a little black box they give Spotify with a joystick on it, where you can select a build and then a green button that you push, and anybody can push it at any time. And the operations group's job is to make sure the green button always works. That's DevOps. That's Spotify. Very different. So the way things flow is very different in every company, and we have to figure out what their priorities are and how to step by step go through scaling the process into hundreds of teams. Now, one of the things that we have to explain to management is where Agile comes from. When we wrote the Agile Manifesto, the reason the name is Agile, there was a lot of debate about what we would call it, is because of this book, Agile Organizations. And it's a book about 100 hardware companies. And what they said is, we are lean, and what we've added is customer collaboration. We're going to get the customer involved in product creation. And they said, it doesn't cost any more to do that, but it does require major changes in organization, management philosophy, and operations. And that means that the leadership has to be totally retrained in most companies. because their primary focus needs to be on eliminating waste in the system, which Jörn is going to talk about in our track today. And to do that, they need to understand a lot of lean principles, how to map value streams, how to systematically implement what Toyota calls single-piece continuous flow. So that's what Agile is, lean plus involving the customer. So in order to do that at scale, it's really more about getting the management agile. You know, lots of times the developers are already agile, but the management is the problem. So a lot of our work is in leadership development. How do we train the management in this whole scaling paradigm? How do you go through the product cycle, starting with a vision, getting the portfolios broken down, getting the releases? How do they do releases? How do you get feedback from the customer? And how do you deal with this, what we call the Scrum Master cycle, where impediments have to flow all the way up, and there needs to be mechanisms for cross-team coordination, okay? So the leadership needs to understand these things, how they work, and how they can participate in a way that makes it go faster and doesn't slow it down. So what we've done with these pieces, each one has inputs and outputs. And we train people systematically. And, you know, at this level, this comes in and this has got to go out. And you've got to have those deliverables. And so what do you need to do to get them? Well, you know, one of the reasons, or I would say the main reason I created Scrum, back 20 years ago, you know, this year is the 50th year of Moore's Law. So there's been a lot of papers on this. And this is one of the original diagrams that Moore drew. And it's a diagram that shows the number of transistors on a chip and the cost of those transistors. And what he showed is that year after year, the cost per transistor gets lower if the number of transistors on the chip is bigger. And that's why your laptop costs half as much and goes twice as fast every year. But what we were looking at in software, and this is published in this paper many years ago, is hardware is going up, and this is a logarithmic curve, but hardware is accelerating really fast, but software is not keeping up. So how do we accelerate? How do we get on Moore's law of software? Okay, so you know, what we start off with Scrum, we have beginner teams, and along here you got the number of stories in a sprint and the cost of the story, average cost of a story per sprint. And as teams get better, they actually start having working software. They can get more stories done per sprint, and the sweet spot is higher, and if they go into continuous deployment, it gets better and better. So we're driving this Moore's law of software curve. That's the whole reason for implementing Scrum. Most people don't know that. And if you have good leadership, you can really make this work. So I work with a venture capital firm. We have about $1 billion invested in, I think we have 36, we've sold off some of our companies. We sold one of them for $2.7 billion to Salesforce.com. That was really cool. We only invested about $10 million. But we have 36 companies in our portfolio right now left, and we want all of them to do Scrum. The CEO of our investment firm discovered Scrum makes everything go twice as fast. He said, we need to implement it everywhere. So our investors are on a Scrum team. They have a search team that's Scrum. They have a recruiting team, an HR team that hires people for companies Scrumming. We have 5 or 6 teams supporting our investments, all Scrumming. And after they ran hundreds of sprints, all the data was in version 1. That was one of the companies we funded. They analyzed the data, and they found that the people that were working long hours, there was still some waterfall mindset. And some people were working long hours, and their productivity was low compared to the ones doing Scrum well. And the peak of productivity for the Scrum was less than 40 hours a week. So the CEO pulled everybody together and said, we are no longer going to have anybody working late hours weekends. If you're doing that, you're going to be a bad person in this company. And everybody is going to double production. Off they went, and one team didn't. And he said to that team, he said, you clearly don't know how to do Scrum. We're going to bust you up and put you on the fast teams, take your backlog with you. By the time he was done, every team in the entire organization was running at 300% of their original velocity. So good leadership can scale velocity. If you look at what's going on in the research at Harvard about companies, Professor Carter has published many books on change. One of his recent works is on how to accelerate. To do that, you need both management and leadership. We have some of that at Apple, Google, and Spotify, but there's a lot of chaos out there. Many companies are chaos. I was at Twitter recently, and they have a lot of money from their going public, about 2,000 developers. The leadership would like them all to do Scrum. I asked them what they were doing, and they said, well, we're doing some Kanban. I said, how's it working? They said, well, everything is stuck in our deployment column. And I said, well, what are you doing about it? And they said, well, we don't know what to do. We're going to hire 2,000 more developers. So that's pretty crazy, because it would be really simple to double the productivity of the 2,000 they have, and it would be a lot less painful than hiring 2,000 more people and trying to make that work. So, if you read the press, they're having a little problem in the press right now because of their earnings. And they need to fix that. They need to get more like Google. We have this doomed category, okay? Nokia. Nokia was number one, and they're gone. Why was that? That's an interesting analysis. We'll hit on some of the issues that took out Nokia. The lesson today is it does not matter how good you are. It does not matter how big you are. You can be taken down if you're not agile. Most of the companies we work with are bigger companies, are big bureaucracies. It takes, well managed, but it takes a huge amount of work to get anything done. So what Professor Carter is recommending, what he's seeing working, is that really these companies need to think that, for new product development where they need to be agile, it's a different operating system. So they can take this multi-billion-dollar hierarchy, and it's generating a lot of cash, and okay, just leave it that way. It could be slow, but it's generating the money. But for the new product development, they're going to get killed unless they're agile. So when they make that agile, it needs to be a completely different organization with different rules and different procedures. Because the old thing is like Windows OS, and the new one is like Mac OS. And if you execute a Windows API call against the Mac OS, it doesn't work. And getting people to separate this in their mind is really challenging. Yeah, I went to Stack Overflow and I looked up, okay, what's going on with Windows programmers trying to go to Mac? Well, the Mac framework's a very different way of thinking. And if you don't get that different way of thinking, you're constantly struggling. And also, if you're trying to write MFC-style code on a Mac, your app looks really bad, and people think it sucks. So we have a lot of Agile implementations out there that suck because it's a similar kind of thing. And if you can actually get in the new mindset, it's amazingly fast, okay? And the same thing is true about Scrum. So trying to educate the leadership about that is challenging. There are companies that are doing this pretty well. GE decided, hey, we need $1 billion startup. They started up, and in 3 years, it had $1 billion worth of revenue. That's a pretty good startup. They have a practice called FastWorks. They have thousands of FastWorks projects based on lean startup. And if one of those projects runs into a bureaucratic problem, the CEO comes down and crushes the bureaucracy. Okay, that's real leadership. And very few companies seem to be able to do that. In fact, most companies, when they're starting off, they implement what we call fragile, okay? You developers, you need to run faster, okay? You do that over there. We managers, we're not going to do anything different. And we want all the waterfall reports. We want to know if you're going to meet the dates. Just run twice as fast. How many are in fragile companies right now? We've got a lot of them here in Amsterdam, right? How's that working for you guys? These are the ones that, go off the rails, We've got new managers come into these, management tends to change every 6 months. You get a new manager comes in, if it's fragile to start with, you get another waterfall manager. I've seen them ban Scrum. That's what happened at MySpace. The new leadership banned Scrum. All the best people jumped ship. And MySpace immediately went into the doomed category, right? So watch out for that. There's been a lot of work. I have a background I'll be talking about later as a fighter pilot and also many years in healthcare as a professor in a medical school for 11 years. So I've done a lot of research on safety, patient safety and flight safety. And the research shows that the companies that really kill a lot of people are the pathological companies. They're the ones where people are hoarding information to themselves, not sharing, lots of fear and threats. And if anything bad happens, they look for a scapegoat, somebody to blame. Okay? I won't ask you how many of you are in those companies. Most of the companies trying to implement Scrum initially are big bureaucracies. They want to protect the departments, protect their turf. Everybody has to follow the rules. If you break a rule, then you're going to be brought to justice. The companies that work in terms of safety, healthcare and flying, are the ones that are called generative organizations. They're focused on the mission. They're focused on performance. When things break down, they look at issues within the system. They systematically fix them. They get better and better. So becoming a generative organization is the key, one of the keys to scaling Scrum. And recently, as we've begun to diagram organizations, here's a diagram from a recent paper of teams with dependencies. I happen to know, it's not in the paper, I happen to know this is Skype. They're getting better, but at the time that this was worked out, they couldn't deliver anything in less than 7 months. Make a one-line code change, it'd take months to get anything shipped. We're finding, we've always known we've had spaghetti code and it was a bad thing, but now we're finding at least you can fix spaghetti code. But now we're finding that the spaghetti organizations are even worse. And until you straighten those out, you can't even get at the spaghetti code. It's a mess out there. The other thing is many of the companies we work with are driven by compliance. If you're building a medical device, you've got to be FDA compliant and so forth. And people think that they can, it's the Windows API forces certain rules, and they're different than the Mac OS. And so we have to go in, work with the compliance people and say, hey, you need to lead it totally differently. In fact, you need to lead the Agile transformation by making compliance agile. How would you do your traceability and your documentation in an agile way? Recently, one of the big companies I work with, the compliance team says, we need to do test-first development. That will give us better traceability. And everybody in the bureaucracy says, no, we could never do that. The bureaucracy's trying to stop it before they can even think about being agile. It's mind-boggling what's going on out there. But some companies are able to make a transition, and when they do, they turn this management hierarchy sideways. And the managers become leaders. That's what we see at Spotify, Salesforce.com. The teams are self-managing, driving towards the product owner, and the managers are supporting the teams, okay? And the managers help refactor the organization, because to build good applications, you need to refactor them constantly. And the same thing is true of the organization. That's a new concept for a lot of managers. So managers need to become leaders. To be appraised at CMI level 5, we don't have a role in the Scrum Guide for managers, but we had to have one for the CMI appraisers. And this is it. They need challenging goals, a business plan that works. They need to identify and remove the impediments that the teams are coming up with. They need to hold the product owners accountable for delivering revenue and the Scrum Masters accountable for process improvement. Now, it's really interesting out there. Some companies have no management today. Billion-dollar companies. Companies like Valve, a big gaming company. Morningstar's, a food processing company. Zappos, many of you have heard about. Gore, Grindr. The state of Washington. The CIO of Washington wrote a constitution where he gave up all his power to the people. But that's probably way off in the future for most of you. It's a really interesting development going on. What we are seeing, and Trifork is evolving this way, it's very interesting, is that organizations are becoming smaller, 50 to 150, broken up into pieces, and then federated, if you want, multi-billion-dollar companies. And Professor Nonaka, who came up with the term Scrum, which Scrum is based on, writes a lot about that in his books. So there's a few secrets to Agile performance that a lot of managers don't get. Scaling down, not up, would be a really smart thing. We have teams where 8 people have done more production software than 400 people at Microsoft. So maybe we should scale down to 8 instead of hiring 400, right? If you could do that, that would be a lot better. Scale out, not up. In our hardware practice, Joe Justice has a nonprofit, WikiSpeed, and they build cars in 1-week sprints. And the way they scale is they get a shipping container with a build team, they build the car. And if they need to build 200, they have 200 shipping containers. They don't create assembly lines. That's the old way of doing it. The other thing we're seeing that's really helpful is the idea of scaling in, not out. So what we do is we create a backlog for the company and break it down into a portfolio, and then we say, okay, let's form the teams around this backlog where the company's going. Let the company self-organize itself into teams that's going to drive the backlog. The key to getting Scrum implemented well, we're finding, is a leadership action team. If you look at the data on Agile today, you'll see this is the latest data. Just the last couple of weeks, the Standish Group gave me their data. It's a summary data for the last 5 years for over 50,000 projects. And what it shows is that the waterfall success rate is 11% and Agile is 39%. Much better, almost 4 times better now. The total failure rate, nothing ever delivered, complete disaster, is 29% in waterfall, 9% in Agile. We still have some of them that are going off the rails. But the interesting thing to me is 52% of Agile teams can't deliver software on time, on budget, make the customer happy. So 52 plus 9, that's 61% of people saying they're Agile don't have working software. And that's the second value in the Agile Manifesto. So we got some real problems out there. And in order to fix them, if you have a big company trying to use Scrum, the leadership needs to help. And they need to have a leadership action team that takes in all the information, particularly the impediments flowing up from the teams, and then generates actions that transforms the company. And they need to aggressively be doing that constantly. And the best model or the best image lately on how to think about that is General McChrystal's book. JJ will be talking this afternoon, was asked to help with that book. We were losing the war in Iraq because the escalation of terrorist incidents was just going out of sight. And the Army had already changed into teams. You know, they had special forces teams, SEAL teams, intelligence teams, but they were losing. But then they figured out they had to have a team of teams, cross-functional teams, linked together, where the leadership team is cross-functional as well, and they have people either on these teams or directly connected to the team. So you have a mesh. And only then could they get all the intelligence from all the different agencies in one room where they had the SEALs and the special forces, and within the hour execute. And then the terrorist incidents went right down. The war turned around. And then particularly the intelligence organization said, oh, this sharing thing, this is too much. We need to go back to our bureaucratic silos. So, you know, we're waiting around the US for the next catastrophe because they went back to totally broken again. So the leadership action team has to stay on top of this day and night forever, or the organization will self-destruct. I don't know what it is, human nature or something. Sometimes we call this an agile transition team, but it really needs to be an ongoing team. Some of the best implementations of this I've seen, I mentioned the Metascrum, I'll talk about that in a minute, but the main thing the leadership action team needs to deal with is impediments floating up, they need to execute against them. And most companies, the middle management layer blocks that. So at John Deere, which builds agricultural equipment and has achieved a really high performance, 800% improvement in production of hardware with Scrum, their leadership action team, if there's a Scrum Master that doesn't get an impediment for them to fix for more than 3 sprints, they replace the Scrum Master. So that's an aggressive leadership action team. And so that cracks through all the nonsense within the organization. But the Metascrum is a way to operationalize this. Many of our venture groups do this on a weekly basis. The product owner leads the meeting, the senior management's there, the CEO is like the Scrum Master of the meeting. They go out, they review where's the company on their sprints, where are they heading, what are the problems, what are the technical problems, what's the new market issues, what about the new contracts. Given all that, how will they steer the Scrum implementations? And all the impediments are flushed out, and the CEO makes sure by the 5 o'clock that day, they're all gone, including changing the management. Works really well, highly recommended. So here's the kind of things the leadership action teams do. How many people have too many projects going on at once? I think most of you that are not raising your hands probably just don't want to raise your hand. How many have everything top priority? How many have managers who don't understand Scrum? How many have leadership that's worried about their job, might change, fear, Scrum? How many don't have continuous integration? automated testing. Nobody's admitted. Sometimes the coaches are not surfacing impediment. Sometimes the management is not moving waste. So the leadership action team needs to crush all this. That's their job. There's things they need to get rid of, like reporting. Get rid of timesheets. Every time I'm CTO, my first act, 8 o'clock, the first day I show up, I abolish timesheets. Hire for teams. I can't tell you how many HR teams have told me, we try to hire these really smart developers. We thought that, they just sat in their cube and you slid food under the door and they never had to come out and talk to anybody. But now you want them to be able to talk to someone. Okay, we can hire those kind of people just as easily as the ones that can't talk. Job descriptions need to change, focusing on cross-functionality and team contribution. Rewards, reward team performance appraisals, get rid of them. Google doesn't have them and they're winning. Why do you have them? Space, all these things need to change. So leadership needs to reorganize and reorient the company in significant ways. They need to deploy aggressive Scrum. I just came from Germany. They said, in Germany, the Agile guys all say it means developers can do whatever they want. So I showed them this picture. What if these guys do whatever they want? They're never going to get anywhere. And the faster they go, the more resistance there is. So the guy in front has got to be cutting through that resistance and working harder than anyone else. That's the Scrum Master. And if the Scrum Master gets tired, he needs to peel off and get at the back of the line, and someone else needs to come up. That's Agile means going fast. Some teams seem to forget that. So we're doing a lot of work on scaling, and we're doing a webinar next week, and we're starting to do 2-day scaling courses in Boston, Palo Alto, Stockholm in the next few months. And so those are some of my thoughts about the big problems in Agile land. And I hope this gives you some thoughts. How many managers do we have here in the room? Do we have any managers? Not so many. So you developers, you're going to have to go back. You're going to have to sit down with your management team. Make some recommendations on what they should do. Okay, well, thanks for your attention. And I think it's time to move on to the tracks. And I hope you have a great 2-day session here at GOTO. Thank you.